Okay, so today we are going to, I'll be talking about Angular signals, and the topic is going to be, are we saying goodbye to RxJS? So before I start, I'm going to tell you who am I. I'm Eduardo Roth. I'm a senior software engineer at Hero Devs. I'm also an Ionic developer expert. I'm also a proud co-organizer of the Angular community meetup, the Spanish chapter. We have meetups each second Tuesday of every month. And recently, I got selected as an NG champion at Conf. So those are my social network links, and you can find me on Twitter, LinkedIn, or GitHub. So let's get started. So first, before I go on about the RxJS and if we are going to say goodbye after we implement signals or after the Angular team implements signals in Angular 16, what are actually signals? So they are a reactive primitive that the Angular team brought to Angular 16 that opens a new way to handle fine-grained reactivity. So right now, the way that Angular change detection works is that they check from top to bottom every single component and checks if anything needs to be updated on the DOM on the DOM. So with signals, the purpose is to have this fine-grained reactivity that we know exactly, Angular know exactly what to update and only update that, which will get performance gains. So to go on to continue now, I'm not going to dive deep into what exactly are signals. In later today, we have this great conference from Inia. I forgot the last name. I'm sorry, but he's a great guy and he posts a lot of Angular stuff on Twitter. So before I well, sorry, I'm not going to deep dive into into signals. So to answer the question, so are we finally going to say goodbye to RxJS? No, we are not going to say goodbye. This is something that many people thought after Angular implemented signals. So are we finally getting rid of RxJS because some people or a lot of developers or new Angular developers find using RxJS really complicated? So we are not going to say goodbye because it still has its uses. I'm so sorry it doesn't that the gifs doesn't move. So I'm sorry about that. We will need to imagine that they are moving like this one. This is Ryan Reynolds asking, but why? So the reason is that signals are meant to be synchronous and they are great for updating variables and results for the things that we know or are happening at the moment. For example, DOM events or synchronous stuff like entering a name or a value into an input, maybe clicking or doing things like that. But not so great if we use them to fetch information from an API or to wait for an event to happen. So the like I mentioned, they work great for an input field, but not for API calls. And you will have, for example, race conditions. You might face race conditions when using signals with API calls. For example, I have this small snapshot of the network tab in the developer tools. As you can see, it gets it's an API call to the character and it sends a random page. And if you look right into the right, you can see in the waterfall graphic that the last one, which is page 19, finished before the page 5. So what was happening here? I was clicking on a load characters button, and the last click was asking for page 19. But if you see, the page 5 took longer to get the results from the server. So even though that the last click that the last call was for page 19, I got the results for page 5. So, well, in this GIF, Michael was asking to explain that as if he was a 5 years old. So, okay, I'm going to do that. So, for example, the race conditions or the signals, you imagine that you are a kid and you have a candy jar in your room. You have it, you know exactly how many candies you have, and when it goes empty, you just go to the pantry, you get the bag of candies, and you fill your your jar with the candy, so it's already filled. That will be asynchronous. That will be synchronous. That will, you know exactly what you have. You already have the bag of candies in your pantry. You have everything you need to get the to fill your jar. But what happens if you don't have any more candies in the pantry? Well, imagine that you are a kid, you have the cell phone, you call your parents, which are outside, are away from home. So you call your mom and you call your dad and you ask for a bag of candies, but they are not there in the house. So you don't actually have the bag of candies, and you don't know when they will arrive. So when they get back home, it might be that your mom arrives first, or maybe your dad, but the one that arrives first is going to fill your empty jar with the candies, and they will call a day. But then your second parent arrives and they see your jar and they think, hey, maybe you don't like those candies, so I'm going to empty your jar and I'm going to fill that with my candy bag. But maybe you were actually wanting the candies that your mom or the first parent brought you. So by having that, you will miss the actual values that you will have. So, well, this is I forgot the name, Chris Pratt, uh moving and saying wow. And that's where signals and observables interoperability is for. So Angular team gave us two functions or two methods. One is called to signal, and the other is to observable. They've been working on the RFC, and the first methods for these were called from observable and from signal, but they decided to change that to be like the final value that they are going to provide. So it's going to be to signal, which takes an observable, and they take an array of options, which right now it's an initial value that you can provide. If your observable doesn't immediately send a value, you can provide one for the signals. Remember that the signals need to have an initial value, and require sync, which allows us to tell the observable, or to tell the signal, that they are going to emit synchronously. And the to observable function, which changes the signal and converts that to an observable. So how is that possible? So the team in Angular, they've been working on these functions that to signal. This is an excerpt from the GitHub RFC, which is a sub RFC from the signals implementation, because it has a couple of they have different topics that they are trying to implement. That the signal method, it converts an observable to an Angular signal by using the toSignal function. Internally, what this does is that they take the observable, they subscribe to the observable, and they create an effect that updates the signal anytime that the observable emits a value. And the great thing about this is that with toSignal, the observable gets unsubscribed automatically anytime that the signal is destroyed. So for example, in this case, if you have an observable from an API call and you convert that to signal, so it's easier to implement in your code or in your template, you avoid having to use the unsubscribed. So for example, in the case that you are getting from the values from observables, you don't have to wait or to call the onDestroy Angular lifecycle hook, or right now we have the destroyed ref. That this is another thing that the Angular team brought in the Angular version 16 release that you can use with the inject provider. But in this case, anytime that your component or directive is destroyed, the observable is unsubscribed. So this helps a lot when you are working with observables and to signals. You can say goodbye to the async pipe So you no longer have to subscribe imperatively in your code or use the assign pipe. And the2observable is a function that takes the signal and returns an observable. The thing here is that the to observable, it doesn't automatically clean or unsubscribes the observable when you go away from when your component is destroyed. There's some reasons behind this decision. Maybe that the signal is long lived and it's not attached to a single component. It could live in a service or any other place that you might not. It might not be destroyed when you destroy your component. So you need to be careful. But you can use the take until, and that will help you to destroy or to unsubscribe or to don't have memory leaks in your code. So by using those, you can interact with signals and RxJS in your code. So for this case, are we really saying goodbye to RxJS? No, RxJS is not going anywhere any soon. So that's my presentation, and this is, I forgot his name, but saying thank you. I really appreciate the time that you gave me to present today. This is a quick topic about RxJS and signals, and I hope that you enjoy it. Thanks.